because we found that when we organize with love at the center, we have changed this world. We can change this world, and we will change this world.
Can you please introduce yourself?
I'm Heather Booth.
Can you tell us how you started in activism and why?
Well, first, I really want to thank you because, Ariella, what you do by every day bringing news of what are hopeful signs in this very challenging, authoritarian, threatening, even violent period, what you do in bringing messages to a broader public brings us hope and caring and builds a community with love at the center. So you asked how I became involved. For the broad move of it, I became involved in the early civil rights movement and then have stayed active through the women's movement, movement for worker rights, consumer rights, and almost every level, and have stayed active. I actually became active when I was about 13 years old, found the American Friends Service Committee, and was convinced by a friend to hand out flyers against the death penalty. I lived in New York City and someone was about to be executed. I didn't think that was what we should be doing as a society, though in fact there needed to be punishment when they're crimes and rehabilitation. But I handed out flyers when I was about 13 years old. It was at a time when almost no one believed there should not be a death penalty. But now we live in a period in which the vast majority of this country live in states in which there is no death penalty, because we found that when we organize with love at the center, we have changed this world. We can change this world, and we will change this world. And the people listening to this podcast, the people watching this Zoom, are amongst the people who will change this world. And it makes me hopeful, even in a time in which the opposition is trying to crush our hope and crush us.
What inspired you to get involved in the death penalty when you were 13?
Though it's hard for me to remember at 13, what I do remember is that after that, one community of people supporting each other led me to then find the civil rights movement. And that time was closer to 1960. And I found the Congress on Racial Equality and then the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. In the North, where I was living, it was called the Friends of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And from there, I was moved both by the stories of how people were being treated in the North as well as in the South, and how it seemed that people couldn't live with dignity and respect without being brutalized, some even killed. And so I joined in this Friends of SNCC, and there was an effort in 1964 that many of your listeners have probably heard about, and that was called the Freedom Summer Project, where Northern students were recruited to support courageous African Americans in the South who were struggling for the right to vote. And I'll show you 3 pictures if you want.
Yes, absolutely.
From that time. So here, I'm 18 years old, and I'm here playing the guitar. And this is Fannie Lou Hamer. Wow. And 2 of her friends in front of her house in Rollville, Mississippi. If your viewers don't know who Fannie Lou Hamer is, you should find out. She was a great heroine of the civil rights movement and the leader of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And this is a picture of me again at 18 during that summer, just holding a sign in support of a voting rights effort. We were trying to register people to vote. And what's interesting and why I have this picture is it was taken just minutes before everyone in that demonstration was arrested. It wasn't even designed as civil disobedience. We just were trying to support people who were registering to vote. But there were people who were functioning with illegitimate authority. And we realized sometimes you have to stand up to illegitimate authority. And so we took those risks. Just like now, there's illegitimate authority, people who are breaking what otherwise were the rules, the norms, and the values of what we think should be a democratic society. And in breaking them, we also need to come together. And so in Mississippi, we came together, we formed the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and registered people where they were, and we did organizing. I mention this because we now need to organize. And here's a picture of me again at 18 in a cotton field,
Wow.
registering, going to someone's home and registering them to vote. I mention that particularly because we need to do that kind of organizing. Go out, meet people, neighbor to neighbor, join in groups, build block clubs, have house parties, engage with people who already might support us and might want to volunteer also, or might not yet support us and don't have the information and either are so busy they're not listening to anything or have listened to fake news and don't really know what's going on. Now, during that summer, I think many know that the Mississippi Freedom Summer gained notoriety when three of the young volunteers, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner, were killed at the hands of the Klan. But within a year, we won a Voting Rights Act. And we won it because people organized. They went out, in effect, if not to the cotton field, but to rural communities, to suburban areas, but to areas that were their own neighborhood. And we need to build that kind of effort. I'm now with a group called Battleground Alliance, and it's organizing in neighborhoods. And it's focused on 38 marginal Republican districts to take back Congress. We can do it. We can have a lever of power, but we need to begin now with our neighbors, talking to people, listening. What are their concerns? And for example, now with this shutdown that's happening, people need to know that this Trump shutdown, this Republican forced shutdown, is because they're taking away our health care. There's almost $1 trillion being taken out of health care and being put instead, given to the ultra wealthy who are their donors in the tax breaks. But we can change this when we organize with love at the center.
How do you convince people who think that this is a lost cause or think that voting doesn't matter? Or I get so many people who are just like, it's too little, too late, where there's no use. Everything's done. I'm just going to sit here and wallow.
The opposition certainly wants us to feel there's nothing can be done and therefore give up. But in fact, we've seen from history that when people stay together, come together, stand up, turn out, sit down. A friend of mine's going to have a die-in, have a demonstrate, engage, and vote, and take every lever that we can. We then have changed the world. We now see it building. Well, people saw it with Jimmy Kimmel. Said, oh, they've taken him off late night TV. But in fact, the breadth of support was so great. People said no. And the cancellations came in for the station. And at that point, he was hired again. And then Sinclair said, oh, no, but we're not going to show him. And then even Sinclair had to, the owner of the overall stations, had to give in because too many people were saying, I won't cooperate. I won't go along. And we see this now building. October 18th, there's going to be another one of these wonderful turnout days, the No Kings Day. I understand there are over 1,200 demonstrations already. It may even be 2,000 demonstrations.
I think it might be.
It's over 2,000 demonstrations already planned, and the numbers are growing. October 18th, you can find it online. Go to the Mobilize link. I'll be there. You should be there. We'll come together. And you know, there is a theory. There were two academics who looked at how did protest work against authoritarian regimes around the world. Erica Chenoweth was one of them. And they found that when you looked at authoritarian regimes, when 3.5% of the population come together and protest and say, we will not go along with this, we will not cooperate, At that point, in most of the cases, the regime itself starts to fall from its own base and from the public that says, this is not what we want. And that's where we come in. And what we do really matters. It matters what you do as an individual. It matters what you do with your neighborhood, your community group, and larger organizations. And when we organize with love at the center, we'll change this world.
I have so many people in my comment section and across social media, especially when there's a big protest, that say, well, if you're just holding signs on the sidewalk, you're not doing anything. What do you say to those people who want more action and who don't think the actions that are taking place are big enough?
Well, we certainly need all sorts of things, but one of the benefits of the demonstrations is that it allows us to build our numbers. Our numbers will grow. It will give people confidence. It will say we're not alone. There are others there too. And then it also may give direction about what's the next thing we can do. And we have to do things on so many levels. There are those taking legal action. We need that. And there are courts that are stopping some of the abuses, forcing some rehiring, forcing some action to preserve what modest democracy we had and then try and advance it. There are then who are doing the visibility and the protest. There are some forms of non-cooperation that actually interfere with this authoritarian regime. I was just in Rochester, New York, doing some work, training, and ICE showed up at a building where there were roofers repairing a roof. They didn't know who those people were, but they thought, well, some of them sound or look like they came from another country. Let's go arrest them. They pulled one person in and abducted one person, and 100 people showed up, and ICE left. So it gives people courage, and it can also make people question, even in ICE, is this really what I should be doing? So legal, the turnout and support, the non-cooperation, and then the building of overall operations, like I said, with Battleground Alliance. And we are taking it into the elections, and we're planning now. And there are elections this year that matter. They're certainly in Virginia and New Jersey. And if we build those every day, we can make a statement. And there's city and state and local elections in New York, and there's school boards. I just got off the phone with a group called Red, Wine, and Blue. What a fabulous organization. And have been heavily focused on school board elections, because there's this Moms for Liberty that's basically saying we can't teach the real history. We can't teach the real literature that's informed us for years and years and have broadened our minds. But instead, we can have a school system that works for the children as well as the parents and the community. And they've won over 70% of the districts where they've worked. And so, yes, we do need to move this power into elections, but we need to use every access, every forum at our disposal, including podcasts like this one. So, Ariella, thank you for spreading the word.
I love that you brought up Rochester because I covered that in one of my 3 wins that week. I'm so inspired when just people standing, not doing anything, just standing is enough to make a difference and to make them run scared.
And I understand there were actions like that that also mattered in Chicago,
Yeah.
in LA, and the horrors that are going around in Chicago. They were they were tying the hands of toddlers who were taken in 3 a.m. raids. This is inhuman, threatening livelihoods, threatening lives. But we can stop this as both the people within the community, but also the mayors, the governors, the elected officials, and the public at large are saying, you don't do this with our lives. You don't do this with our country.
One of the stories I'm covering today for 3 wins is in Lakewood, Ohio. They have a new referendum for gender freedom. And even though Ohio doesn't, it has passed bills to ban trans support, they have home rule. And so the city council voted to give protections to trans people in a way that no one else in the state did. And it's just because people voted them into office. And it's such a beautiful showing of like the power of elections, the power of voting.
And on almost every issue, the public is with us. About 70% who think we need reproductive freedom. Similar percentages who think there need to be background checks on on weapons so that people don't have these automatic guns, and there need to be some limit so that we have a society in which people can feel safer. There's similar percentages who believe that there is climate change and we need to take action on it. And there certainly are similar percentages who feel that elections need to be free and fair and not subject to the kind of authoritarian fears, and even high percentages like that against these abductions on the street. So we can win, but we need to mobilize and engage the people of the country. You know, Ariel, I sometimes talk about four M's for the letter M that people should think about. The first M is members. We need to recruit people. We need to broaden out. If you had one person listening to this podcast, what if you recruited one other and there were two? What if when October 18th, the No King's Day is coming up, you were going to come maybe with your neighbor or child or parent? What if you brought two more? The numbers, then it's three, five more. We need to increase our numbers. Write down the name. Who will you talk to? Who will you recruit? Who will you go with? Make it a concrete plan. The second M is message. What will we say? And we say, for example, on this shutdown, it's a Republican shutdown because they want to take away our health care in order to give tax breaks to the wealthiest. And here's my personal story. And if I tell our story, if we say what's happening to real people, it then touches people and they say, oh, gee, I didn't realize we were doing that. I just heard they're going to make it harder for senior citizens to get Social Security. What's that about? This is one of the ways that we allow people to live in dignity in older age, but this is a message we have to get out. So where will you get it out? On social media. Ariella, it's great that you've got a podcast, but maybe we need to start our own. But social media, will you say it to a neighbor? Will you say it at your school organization, your knitting club, your book club? So members, message, money. Where will we give? And everyone asks us for money, but could we ask others? Could you recruit $5 from someone else to a cause that you care about? $50. Is there someone you know you could recruit $500? Social change costs money. We need to support these efforts. So members, message, money, and movement. We need to show up. We need to be there, whether it's October 18th. I understand the next turnout event is November 11th around Veterans Day, and there'll be a big focus around this is what it means to have forces that are there to defend democracy and not to destroy democracy. So members, message, money, movement, with the four M's and with the support of people in your listening audience, we can change this world.
What parts of your history and experience feel reminiscent of the fight we're having now, and how did you get out of it?
You know, I've been in so many different struggles. I described the one in the civil rights movement. But then in 1965, I returned to my college campus from the South. And a friend of mine told me his sister was pregnant and not ready to have a child and wanted an abortion. In 1965 in Chicago, where I was in school, three people talking about providing an abortion was a conspiracy to commit a felony, very serious felony. I'm not sure I knew that exactly at the time. I also didn't really know much about the issue. And in 1965, if there are any people listening in of my vintage, they may remember that was a time we barely talked about sex except in the privacy of our most intimate relationships. But I said I would try to help, to do a good deed. And most of our change work comes from a shared values of wanting to help people and make this a better world. So I went to a contact I had from the civil rights movement, and one movement can often help another. And I found a doctor, Dr. T.R.M. Howard, who had been in the Medical Committee for Human Rights, which was the medical arm of the civil rights movement. And many of your listeners may not know his name, but you should. Dr. T.R.M. Howard. He was a great civil rights leader. And I only learned this later, but he had been a leader in Mississippi who had called for the investigation of the murder of Emmett Till. Some of your listeners may have heard that that was a teenager. Emmett was a teenager from Chicago who was killed when he went to visit his aunt in Mississippi. And a white woman, shop owner, shop worker, had said he whistled at her. Even that, by the way, was a lie, and she recanted a few years ago. But because of that charge, Emmett Till was killed. And Dr. Howard was one of the people who said there should be an investigation into the murder. But because he called for that and other things, his name was put on a Klan death list and he had to come to Chicago. I made the arrangement with Dr. Howard and the procedure for the abortion was successful. And I thought I had done one good deed and I really was ready to move on. But then word spread and someone else called and I made the arrangement. And then word spread and someone else called. And as more people were calling, I realized I better really find out what's involved in this. And I learned more about the system. And because it wasn't legal, we called the system Jane and we gave out a phone number and said, pregnant don't want to be, call Jane. There's much more to the story, and there is now an Emmy Award-winning documentary called The Janes. And there's another movie where Sigourney Weaver plays a version of me and one other person who was part of the effort of Jane. But the group learned, the women I recruited to do this support service themselves learned how to do the procedures and themselves performed 11,000 abortions before Roe. We can take action. We can save lives with love at the center. And because others took action and moved it into the electoral process, we finally had a state legislatures and a House and a Senate and a Supreme Court and a president who believed in reproductive freedom. And so we won Roe. And for nearly 50 years, it was the law of the land. And we've changed attitudes on it. So rather than women living in the pain of a private personal decision, realize that this now is something we can discuss as part of the treatment that people may need to lead a full and inclusive life. And we can win when we organize. And it's when we stop that organizing, when we're not listening to people, talking with people, engaging them, or only working on social media and only working in isolation. We don't build the social bonds. That's when we lose and the forces of authoritarian dictatorship take over. But it's through programs like yours, Ariella. It's through the people who are listening, who with love at the center will change this world.
One last question. Are there any current leaders who you're inspired that you feel are continuing your work?
You know, one honest answer is I'd say Ariella Elm. You and the people, if I knew the people who were listening in, I'd say all of you. They're leaders of all sorts of organizations. Leah Greenberg, who's a head of Indivisible. Ana Lilia Mejia, who's the head of Popular Democracy, a great grassroots organization. Or Solma Arias, the head of People's Action. So they're people whose names may not be so familiar to the public, but they are people who inspire us because they're doing the work every day. There also are more prominent leaders. Jamie Raskin in Congress or Jasmine Crockett. These are people who stand up, who speak the truth, who won't take the garbage and just roll over. We need to find those leaders with courage and honesty and caring for the American public. And many of the people listening in this to this Zoom, you are amongst those people. And one of the reasons I keep repeating this message is in part repetition itself is our friend. By the way, repetition is our friend. And I don't know if you've heard this, but repetition
Petition,
is our
our
friend.
friend.
And one of the things worth repeating is that when we organize with love at the center, we have changed this world, and you and all of us together, we will change this world for the better. So I thank you for having me on your program. I thank all the listeners. I thank all of you who'll go out and find that one more member who'll share the message, who'll raise the funds, and who'll show up. And together, we can make this a more just and caring and progressive democratic world.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to remember this probably forever. You are an inspiration, and I can't thank you enough for doing this with me.
Ariella, thanks for having me on.
All
Thanks
right,
so much.
bye.